It was just another tranquil day at Sunny Horizon Ranch, with the only sounds of rustling trees and horses neighing in the distance. Today was different. Police Officer Garrett Johnson was an arrogant police officer who often used methods little short of lawful. Garrett had a plan, and he chose an opportunity to flex his muscles when he came across a young black woman, Alicia, on the ranch, whom he thought was out of place. "What are you doing here?" Garrett asked as soon as he saw Alicia at the hitching post, puffed out as if he were the king of the place, all high-headed. Alicia turned her face up slowly to his question and, still seated where she sat, she smiled and did not rise at all, simply answering, "I am employed here, sir, grooming horses. May I do anything for you, sir?" Garrett smirked at her, looking down his nose at her. "Working, taking care of horses? Here? I don't think this is a place that someone like you belongs," he sneered, not disguising his prejudice. Alicia didn't react at all. Her face didn't change expression, which served only to annoy Garrett all the more. "All right, if you want to prove you belong here, then stay here," Garrett said, pulling out handcuffs. "What are you doing?" Alicia asked calmly as Garrett grabbed her hands and cuffed her to the post, trying to make a point of his dominance. "You know this is illegal, right?" "It's only illegal if there are witnesses," Garrett grinned, looking around. He knew no one would see, but Garrett was wrong. From a nearby stable, a grizzled old stableman, Jackson, a white man with gray mustache and kindly eyes who had spent his life with horses, had been watching everything. He knew Garrett and his arrogance, and it sickened him to see what was happening. Jackson approached quietly, carrying a bucket of water. He saw that Garrett wasn't even paying attention to him, too caught up with his show of power. And then, when the time was right, Jackson suddenly dumped the whole bucket of water right over Garrett. "What the?" Garrett yelled as the cold water wetted him from head to toe. He turned and saw Jackson standing there with a smile. "Oh, excuse me, sir. I didn't see you there," Jackson said in the most over-the-top polite voice. "But, water has this amazing property, it washes all the dirt away." Alicia was biting her tongue to stop laughing as she watched Garrett trying to regain control of the situation. He was soaked and utterly helpless. "You'll pay for this," Garrett yelled, striving to get a grip on his emotions. Obviously, the man's confidence had been rattled. Jackson threw his hands up in mock surrender and said, "Sir, sometimes it's better to think before you act, because sometimes the consequences aren't quite what you expect." Garrett did try to salvage what was left of his dignity and stormed toward the car, but Alicia was still cuffed. Not getting very far at all, in comes a horse in his path, a huge black stallion aptly named Blackie that Alicia had been looking after. He was really smart and seemed to sense when his caretaker needed help. Blackie blocked Garrett's path, refusing to let him pass. Garrett, angry and frustrated, tried to go around the horse, but Blackie kept moving in front of him, seemingly mocking him. "Damn it, move this horse," Garrett shouted, but Jackson just smiled. "Blackie doesn't seem to like it when someone mistreats his friends," Jackson said. "Maybe you should apologize, sir?" Garrett knew he was beaten. His clothes were soaked, clinging to his body. The horse refused to budge and let him go, and old Jackson and Alicia were looking at him as if he were some sort of cartoon character. There was only one obvious way out of this situation: admit defeat. Garrett gritted his teeth, looked at Alicia, and forced out, "I'm sorry." Blackie stepped back, as if understanding that was enough. Garrett, without looking back, swiftly walked to his car and drove off, leaving behind only a wet trail. Jackson approached Alicia, unlocking the handcuffs, and winked at her. "Don't you worry, kid. Life has a way of teaching people like him a lesson, especially if we give it a little help." Alicia smiled, rubbed her wrists, and thanked Jackson. "Thank you, Jackson. I think Blackie was the real hero today." "Oh, he always knows what to do," Jackson replied, patting the stallion's neck. "Now let's get back to work. Justice is justice, but the horses won't take care of themselves." The ranch returned to its normal life, but now there was something new in the air. A sense that justice still had a place, even if it took a few tricks and some good friends to make it happen. After the incident with Garrett, Sunny Horizon Ranch was calm, but it was a calm before the storm. Jackson knew Garrett wouldn't let it go, And he was right. The very next morning, another event took place at the ranch. Garrett returned, but this time not alone. This time with several of his colleague officers that he had harnessed for his version. He tells them how he was belittled on the ranch and is there to restore his pride. Alicia and Jackson were in the yard when they saw some police cars pull up into the ranch. Jackson let out a deep sigh and looked in Alicia's direction. "Looks like the show goes on," he said, concealing his concern. "What are we going to do?" Alicia asked, observing the officers exiting their cars. "Stay cool, kid. Remember, the truth is on our side," Jackson replied, taking her hand in support. Garrett approached them with a smug smile on his face. "Well, Jackson, we will see who laughs now," he said, nodding his colleagues to surround Alicia. "She has done nothing wrong," Jackson said calmly. "You know, everything that happened yesterday was because of your actions." "Shut up, old man," Garrett barked. "You are not in charge here." Among those officers around was one named Thomas, and unlike Garrett, he was reasonable. He approached Alicia and asked, "Ma'am, can you explain what happened yesterday?" Alicia nodded and began to tell him how Garrett had cuffed her to the post without any reason and how Jackson had tried to protect her. Thomas listened carefully, nodding from time to time, and unlike Garrett, he saw sincerity in her words. "Garrett," Thomas said after a brief pause, "it seems you haven't told us the whole truth." Garrett colored with anger. "What do you mean? She's lying." "Calm down," Thomas said. "We just want to get to the bottom of this. If things are as this lady says, then maybe there's been some misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Garrett screamed, completely out of control. "She's just..." "Enough!" Thomas raised his hand, shutting Garrett up. "You've done enough." The other officers started to realize that Garrett was using them for his own purposes. They looked at each other, the expression of their faces a telltale sign of disappointment. One of them, named Mike, turned to Jackson. "Tell us what we can do to make this right," he said. Jackson smiled and said, "Just leave us alone. We live and work here, and we're not doing anything wrong. Alicia is an excellent worker, and she deserves respect." Mike nodded and turned to Garrett. "I think it's time we leave, Garrett." "You can't just walk away," Garrett shouted, but no one was listening to him anymore. The officers turned and began heading back to their cars, leaving Garrett standing there. He tried to say something, but his words were lost in the silence that hung over the ranch. Alicia looked at Jackson and smiled. "Thanks for being here, Jackson. Always, kid. Always," he said, embracing her. Blackie drew closer and nickered softly, as to say that all would be well. Jackson leaned forward to pat his neck and told him, "Well, my friend, looks like another victory." The ranch was back to its usual atmosphere, but now there was a sense of unity and strength in the air. Jackson, Alicia, and even Blackie knew that together they could overcome any challenge and that justice would always find its way, even if it took a little cunning and bravery. The following weeks passed in peace and quiet at Sunny Horizon Ranch, but that feeling of tension was always there. On the ranch, everything continued as usual, but everybody knew that Garrett's fight wasn't over. So they sat one evening under an old oak tree at the stable, resting after hard work, Alicia and Jackson. "You think he'll come back?" asked Alicia, looking at the sunset. Jackson nodded, gazing off somberly. "He'll be back, kid. People like Garrett don't like to lose. But we'll be ready. We've got the truth and we've got friends who'll help." Alicia smiled and nodded toward Blackie, grazing serenely not too far away. "And we've got Blackie," she added. "Oh yes," Jackson agreed. "Our Blackie is a real hero." At an early hour the following morning, before the sun even rose above the horizon, Alicia woke with an unusual noise outside. She went outdoors to see a few police cars pulling up to the ranch again. She quickly ran to Jackson, who was already standing by the stable, ready for whatever might happen. "Looks like they're back," he said as Alicia approached. This time, Garrett came accompanied by a man in a suit. He looked serious, and everything was under his control. Garrett approached Jackson and Alicia with a smug smile. "This is Mr. Williams, a representative from the city council," said Garrett. "He wants to talk to you about some violations that, as it happens, have been going on here." Mr. Williams stepped forward to Jackson and Alicia and had a stern look. "I've been informed of some violations concerning the treatment of animals and inability to follow safety regulations," he told them. "We need an inspection." Jackson didn't seem moved by this. "Of course, Mr. Williams. You are welcome to inspect the ranch. We have nothing to hide." Alicia felt the tension rise, but she knew they had done nothing wrong. She and Jackson led Mr. Williams and the other officers around the ranch, showing them how they cared for the animals, how they kept them safe and comfortable. After a long inspection, Mr. Williams sighed and nodded. "I don't see any violations here," he said, turning to Garrett. "It seems you misinformed me, officer." Garrett colored up with anger but said nothing. He realized that once again his plot had fallen flat. "If you have no other questions, Mr. Williams, we would like to return to work," Jackson said with a pleasant smile. Mr. Williams nodded and faced the officers. "Let's get out of here," he said. "There's nothing to do here." The officers started getting into their cars, and Garrett was left in the middle of the ranch yard all by himself. He cast a glance of pure hatred at Jackson and Alicia but didn't utter a word. He simply turned and walked towards his car. As the police cars drove off, Alicia let out a relieved sigh. "Looks like we've won again," she said, smiling. Jackson nodded and pulled her into his arms. "Yes, kid. But always remember, the fight for justice never ends. We have to be ready for any challenges that come our way." Blackie came up to them, neighing softly, and seemed to agree with their sentiments. Jackson patted his neck and smiled. "Now let's get back to work. The horses won't take care of themselves," he said. And Sunny Horizon Ranch fell back into its routine, but now everyone knew that together, they can overcome any difficulties and justice would always find a way, even if with a little guile, bravery, and the help of loyal friends. Tense were those days that passed after Garrett's latest visit to Sunny Horizon Ranch. Everybody knew Garrett would never stop and they should be prepared for every possible provocation. Alicia and Jackson decided not to wait but to act. They called local activists and lawyers in order to protect themselves against probable legal implications and get some support. In town, they met people ready to help. Most active was a youth human rights organization led by the energetic young woman Lauren. Lauren had extensive experience in fighting for the rights of citizens, and she was a very determined woman. She immediately realized that the problem with Garrett was not a conflict at some ranch, but it was a part of the big problem of abusing authority. "You need to know you are not alone," said Lauren as she met with Jackson and Alicia. "We will do everything we can to make sure this man no longer hurts you and anyone else in our community." Jackson and Alicia felt they had support, and that gave them strength. Together with Lauren, they began preparing official complaints against Garrett's actions, gathered evidence of his wrongdoing, and collected testimonies from people who had previously suffered from his actions. Their struggle moved to a new level, the level of legal justice. Meanwhile, Garrett, after learning about Jackson and Alicia's moves, became even more furious. He realized that if the case went to court, it would be challenging for him to explain his side of the story. Garrett decided to act decisively and intimidate all those opposing him. He gathered several of his supporters, people who owed him or simply supported him for ideological reasons. One evening, when the ranch was wrapped in dusk, Alicia heard the hum of engines. She approached the window and saw some cars approaching the ranch gate. Several men stepped out, among them Garrett. This time, he was resolute. He wasn't going to go away without a victory. "Jackson," Garrett yelled from the gate. "Come out if you have guts." Out into the yard walked Jackson with Alicia. He knew it could get out of hand but showed no signs of alarm. "What do you want, Garrett?" he asked, keeping himself a ways away from the group of men. "You're playing with fire, Jackson. You and this girl think you can beat me?" Garrett shouted across the ranch. "We just want justice, Garrett," Alicia said, stepping forward. "You can't intimidate anyone who disagrees with your methods." Garrett took another step closer, his face purpling in rage. "Justice? I am the law here, and if you don't like it, you'd best be off while you still can," he warned, jerking his head at his men. But Alicia and Jackson didn't move. Their serenity acted like fuel to Garrett's anger. One of the men who was with Garrett tried to step closer, but in that moment, The voice came from the dark. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," guys echoed, and Lauren stepped out of the shadows, along with several activists, all holding cameras and phones, taping everything that was taking place. "If you try anything illegal, everyone will see it," Lauren added, pointing the camera directly at Garrett. Garrett froze. He hadn't expected this turn of events. He realized that now every move he made would be recorded, which could ruin his career. His men also began to look around nervously, unsure of what to do next. "This isn't over," Garrett hissed, glaring at Alicia and Jackson. "You'll all regret this." He gestured to his men, and they began retreating to their cars. Lauren and her activists continued filming until the cars disappeared from sight. "You were brave not to back down," Lauren said, lowering the camera. "But we need to be careful. He won't stop until he tries again." Jackson nodded, looking into the darkness where Garrett's cars had disappeared. "We know, Lauren, but we also know we can't give in. We have to fight, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who's been victimized by people like him." Lauren smiled. "And we'll fight together. Now we have footage that shows how he operates. We'll do everything we can to draw attention to this case." The succeeding days were a beehive of activities. Lauren organized a press conference where she showed recordings from the ranch. This event attracted local media attention, and in no time, the story of abuse of power spread like wildfire within the city. People started showing support for Jackson and Alicia by sending them words of encouragement and offering help. The case went to court. Garrett was summoned for questioning, and his reputation started to go down. The officers who had stood up for him previously would not do so now. None of them wanted to be associated with the scandal. He became isolated, and that itself shook his confidence. In court, Alicia and Jackson testified about the events at the ranch. Lauren and her legal team provided a video taken on-site that proved that Garrett and his men have terrorized them. The lawyers representing Jackson and Alicia were professional and steady, making every effort to follow through on the case. Garrett, who had earlier appeared so powerful, looked lost. His lawyers tried to poke holes in the testimonies, but the evidence was just too convincing. When it came time for the verdict, the court ruled that Garrett's actions were illegal and he was to be punished. The court fined Garrett and took away his badge. He received a suspended sentence for the abuse of power, which was a huge downfall for him, and he knew he was done and over with in his career now. He could not push people around and get what he wanted using his powers. After the trial was finally over, Jackson, Alicia, and Lauren were hugging each other outside the building. "We did it," Lauren said, smiling. "This is only the beginning, but we proved that even people like Garrett aren't untouchable." Alicia nodded, looking up at the sky. "We did this together, and we'll keep fighting for those who can't defend themselves." Jackson patted her on the shoulder. "You're strong, kid, and we're all strong when we stick together." Sunny Horizon Ranch went back to its routine peacefully, but now it was something more than a ranch. It was a place where a victory over evil had taken place. A place where people came to their senses that they could stand up to the strongest enemy if only acting together and not giving up. And though the struggle for justice is never over, they knew an important step toward a brighter future was done. A few weeks after the trial, Sunny Horizon Ranch was again filled with familiar sounds. Horses neighed, leaves rustled, and voices of the workers joyfully rose. Yet by now everybody who worked in the ranch knew that nothing, even the most formidable opponent, was able to destroy their unity. With the new development, Alicia and Jackson continued their ranch work, but it had now acquired a different dimension. They were now a symbol of endurance in this crusade for justice. The neighboring farms started going to them for advice and assistance, fully aware that Alicia and Jackson would never give up on giving a helping hand where it was needed. One day, a man he didn't know came to the ranch. He was reserved, perhaps a little shy. A former colleague of Garrett's, he was a police officer by the name of Brian. He approached Jackson with his head bowed in respect. "I heard what happened," he said without looking up, "and I want to apologize for not standing up to Garrett before. I realized that my silent support was just part of the problem." Jackson looked at Brian intently and then nodded. "The important thing is that you understand it," he replied. "We all make mistakes, but what's important is that we can acknowledge and correct them." Brian let out a sigh and, for the first time, met Jackson's gaze. "I want to help you," he said. "I know the system from inside, and with your permission, I may be a help to you. I want to stop cooperating with injustice, so stop it already." The nearby Alicia smiled and reached out, putting her hand on Brian's shoulder. "We welcome whatever help is available," she said. "Together we have the potential to change what we are presently unable to touch as solitary soldiers." From that moment, Brian became a part of the team. He helped Lauren and her organization with information about the inner mechanisms of the system that allowed people like Garrett to stay unpunished. Thanks to his help, Lauren managed to organize a new campaign aimed at reforming the local law enforcement. Soon enough, the story of Jackson, Alicia, and Sunny Horizon Ranch was to be known throughout the state. They became symbols of resistance to injustice, of fighting for the rights of an ordinary citizen. The ranch became some sort of a place of pilgrimage for journalists, activists, and just concerned people to see the place where this important victory happened. One evening, at sunset, Alicia sat on the porch and watched Blackie graze in the meadow. Jackson came and sat beside her. "Do you think we've changed anything?" she asked, her eyes not leaving the horizon. "Yeah, kid," Jackson replied. "We didn't just make a change. We started something that will change the lives of many people. We showed that there's no need to be afraid and that even the strongest enemy can be defeated if we stick together." Alicia smiled and rested her head on Jackson's shoulder. "You know, I think this is just the beginning. We still have so much work ahead of us." Of course, Jackson nodded. "But we're ready, and we're not alone." Sunny Horizon Ranch continued to live its life, but now it was more than just a place of work. It was a sign, a place where people believed in justice and were ready to fight for it, whatever it may cost. And though the fight for justice is never easy, Alicia, Jackson, Lauren, Brian, and all the rest knew they were on the right path, a path leading to a better future for all. The months that followed the trial marked a new era in the history of Sunny Horizon Ranch. Lauren, Alicia, Jackson, and Brian continued working together, focusing on reforming the local law enforcement. Their team grew, with many concerned people joining them, ready to fight for change. Each new day brought new challenges, but also new victories. One day, Lauren got a call from a journalist with one of the national television channels. Their story had gained attention, and now they were invited for an interview on a popular current affairs program. Lauren convened the team and announced her news. "This is our chance to share our story with the entire country," she said, beaming with enthusiasm. "We can show how ordinary people can make a difference." Alicia and Jackson looked at each other. The couple recognized this was a fantastic chance. However, there was an inkling of fear in the air. They would need to speak in front of an audience of millions, something they were not sure about. "We can do it," Brian said confidently. "We've been through so many hardships, and this appearance is just the next step on our journey. We need to show everyone that the fight for justice is not something abstract. It's real, and anyone can be part of it." The interview went well. Lauren, Alicia, and Jackson shared their story, described the conflict with Garrett, how it was to be able to stand up against injustice, and how necessary the support of the community had been. They spoke with simplicity, without any excess in bombast, and moved most of the listeners. Since the broadcast of the program, letters and calls started to arrive from all parts of the country. People thanked them for the inspiration and support, sharing their own stories of fighting for justice. "I never imagined that our story would affect people so much," Alicia said during one of the team's evening gatherings. "It's just incredible." Jackson smiled and put a hand on her shoulder. "People need an example, kid. And we became that example. We showed that change is possible if you're not afraid to act." But the increased attention to their activities also had a downside. There were those who didn't like their success. Anonymous threats began to arrive at Lauren and other team members' addresses. They realized that their struggle was becoming even more dangerous, and they needed to be careful. One evening, as Alicia was returning from the city after meeting a lawyer, she observed a car following her. Her heart pounded, but she tried to stay calm. She remembered Lauren's advice on what to do in such a situation. Stay on busy roads. Avoid isolated areas. She turned onto the main street, and with all the people, the car finally fell behind. She let out a sigh of relief, but deep down, she knew the threat hadn't vanished. She dialed Jackson's number straight away and told him what had just happened. "Are you safe now?" he asked tightly. "Yes, I am in the city on the main street, but I think I will be here for a while," she said. "Okay, I'll come get you now," Jackson said. "We need to be together to support each other." When Jackson arrived, he hugged Alicia and said, "We knew this fight wouldn't be easy, but we won't let them scare us. We're strong because we're together." Alicia nodded, sure of Jackson and the support of the whole team. They decided to heighten their security measures and agreed always to keep in contact, especially if one was alone. The next day, they convened at the ranch to discuss what to do next. Lauren was somber but determined. "We aren't going to stop," she said. "If they think they can scare us, they're deeply mistaken. We will continue to fight for justice no matter what." Brian, who had been reserved until now, approached Lauren and put a hand on her shoulder. "I know it's tough, but we have support and we must keep going. I know how this system works and I know it's changing. Step by step, thanks to people like you." These words inspired everyone, and though they knew there was still a lot of work ahead, they were ready for it. Their team became even more united, and now it was clear. Their struggle wasn't some kind of personal conflict with Garrett. It was a fight for the future where everyone could feel safe, their rights guarded. Sunny Horizon Ranch became a true symbol of resistance and hope. People from all over the state came to see the place, talk to those who hadn't given up, and find inspiration for their own actions. And although the fight continued, and they knew there was more to come, they also knew they had already taken an incredible step forward. One evening, with the sun setting over the horizon, Alicia, Jackson, Lauren, and Brian sat around the fire in the ranch yard, looking up at the stars just beginning to twinkle in the sky, feeling that many adventures awaited them, but also many victories. "We've come a long way," Lauren said as she stared into the fire, "and I believe this is just the beginning. We've changed something in this world, and we'll keep doing it." "Yes," Jackson agreed. "We are a team, and together we can do anything." Alicia smiled, looking at her friends, and felt hope light up in her heart. She knew they were on the right path and that, against all the difficulties, they would carry on with the fight for what they held to be true. This path was not easy, but it was one filled with meaning and hope for a better future. A few weeks after the interview on the national television channel, an important meeting took place at Sunny Horizon Ranch. Representatives of the local government, as well as several influential figures from the state capitol, arrived. Lauren, Jackson, Alicia, and Brian greeted the guests with some anxiety but also hope. They knew this could be a new step in their struggle. The local government representative, a tall man named Richard Green, was known for his commitment to reforms. He reached out to Lauren and her team after the interview and proposed a meeting to discuss potential changes in the structure of local law enforcement. "We've seen that your work is making an impact," Richard said as everyone sat at the large wooden table in the ranch yard, "and we want to support you. I understand that reforms are a complicated process, but your example shows that change is possible. We're glad to hear this," Lauren said as her heart filled with hope. "We stand ready to collaborate on our efforts to make our community safer for all of us." Richard nodded to turn toward Jackson. "Your example, Jackson, was an inspiration to many people," he said. "What you have done has helped your ranch as well as altering many people's idea of what they could do." Jackson smiled and said, "We're just doing what we believe is right, and if it can help others, we'll keep going." The meeting lasted for several hours. They talked about different initiatives that could help them succeed in the betterment of law enforcement, training of police officers so as to protect human rights, an independent commission to investigate citizen complaints, and work transparency within police agencies. Later, Richard Green addressed the team after the meeting. "I can assure you that we will try all means to make sure that your struggle was not a waste. We will unite together for a system that shelters everyone and not just a few favored ones." These words were important for the whole team. There was still much work ahead, but now, at least on the government level, there was support. This added strength and confidence that their efforts were not in vain. The subsequent weeks were days of hard work. Lauren's team took part in public hearings, met with police representatives, and conducted educational seminars for citizens about their rights. Brian was especially active in these efforts, using his experience in law enforcement to explain how the system works from within and how it might be changed. One day, a middle-aged woman approached Alicia and Jackson when they were working in the stable. She looked worried, but summoned her courage to talk to them. "You're the people fighting for change, right? I want to thank you. My son was a victim of police unfair treatment, and your story gave hope to us. Now he knows we can fight and we are not alone." Alicia stood up and hugged the woman. "We're glad we can help," she said. "Our fight is a fight for everyone who has faced injustice, and we won't stop until stories like yours stop happening." These words meant so much to the woman, and she went away from the ranch with tears of gratitude in her eyes. Jackson watched her go and felt very convinced that what they were doing was, in fact, important. They were protecting their ranch, but they were also changing people's lives, instilling in them hope and faith in a better future. Meanwhile, Garrett, though removed from service, didn't cease to tarnish the team's name. He started working with some corrupt individuals who were also on the negative side affected by Lauren and her team's actions. He spread rumors trying to discredit their work, but the team was ready for this. They knew that the fight against injustice was never easy and that there would always be those who would try to hinder change. One evening, as the team sat by the fire once again, Lauren spoke to everyone. "We've been through so much, and we will have to endure many more. But today, each of you should know that I am proud to work with you. We are changing this world, and I know that we are not going to stop until we have justice for all." Yes, Brian agreed. "We started this fight and we will finish it. We're strong because we're together and because we have the support of the people." Alicia smiled, looking at her friends, and felt the fire of hope rekindle in her soul. She knew the road that they had undertaken was difficult. She also knew that this was the right way, and even if there were still many ordeals in store, they had taken a great step toward this. They had turned themselves into an emblem of hope, and that hope now lived not only in them but in every just-minded citizen who believed in justice. Sunny Horizon Ranch continued to live its life, but now it was more than just a workplace. It was a place where people believed in a better future and were willing to fight for it despite all the difficulties. And though the fight for justice is never easy, Lauren's team knew they were on the right path, a path leading them to justice and hope for all.